Hello, I'm Pete Cole, president and owner of Gamblin Artists Colors. Really happy and honored to be here with Jackson's to talk a little bit about our color house, who we are, and what we do. Robert Gamblin began as an oil painter and as a working artist, and he had a very clear moment where he was standing in the aisle at an art supply store with a basket full of paints, wondering what he was going to have to do in terms of work or creating work, selling work, part-time jobs, just to be able to continue painting. And it was a really formative moment for him as a color maker and for us as a color house. And the year was 1980, and shortly thereafter, he began what is now Gamblin in a one-car garage that's about a mile from our present factory. In his first year, Robert got a used mill from another color house, a bit of pigment, and he spent the entire year making only white. In fact, only titanium white, probably just eating beans. Over the next few years, we moved to a two-car garage, then another two-car garage, and then to our first factory, which was also co-located with the tea factory. Everything great we've ever done has come from listening to artists. So Robert gradually expanded the palette and into all the earth colors, the colors of classical painting, the colors of impressionist painting, all the cadmiums, and then of course the modern pigments, and really became known as the leading American color maker. In America, as soon as you have something good, well, then you make more of it. Add blue sprinkles, add green sprinkles, add a holiday edition, and sort of take up shelf and compromise and dilute. And Robert Gamblin never did any of those things. Early days, everything passed through Robert's hands. Quality control is real easy. It's Bob. Bob doesn't like it, it doesn't go. Bob made it. We just continued to grow. We have more artists that are counting on us, and so we need to deliver. We need to deliver for Jackson's and for your painters. Robert has dedicated his life to oil painting in all aspects of it, helping artists find their own flow in oil painting, his own studio practice, and then the world of conservation. And so he reached out and built relationships with our National Gallery in the US, the Getty, Tate London, the British National Gallery. Through these relationships, he came to be commissioned by the Smithsonian to make 150 colors for their records out of a mix of contemporary, historical, and almost prehistoric pigments that are no longer in use. And this work gave Robert a reach back through the entire 600-year history of oil painting. And the romantic notion or the myth is that things were better back then and the paints the old masters had were better. And there's folks that will tell you that they're making paint in that tradition. And it's just not true. Robert learned that a lot of these pigments were quite terrible to work with, quite terrible to paint with, impermanent, not light fast. So he really resolved to build a color house that was going to lead oil painting forward. Robert Gamblin himself, and for Gamblin as a color house carrying on, we are all painters, and we've always tried to speak to artists eyeball to eyeball. We're listening and we're looking to take insights from painter studios. So Robert began, of course, pre-internet, and he had an old Volvo, and he drove around with his paints, working with painting groups, working with art supply retailers to really engage artists directly in their studio, out in the field, plein air painting, and of course, selling some paint along the way, but mainly listening. Painting has been around for 600 years. There shouldn't be secrets. We shouldn't be stuffy about it. We should make oil painting accessible to people, help the next generation of artists to find their flow in oil painting. And we do that through education, which of course now we've moved on from the old Volvo. We have the internet, we have our workshops, we have our outreach through a group of influencers we work with, really filling a gap in art education. Robert went to art school in the 70s, and during that time, as he would say politely, students were not fertile ground for hearing about technique and how things should be done properly. So it was a period of abstract expressionism, throwing out of rules, And a lot of that knowledge, much of which matters a great deal to making permanent paintings, was lost. There have been a couple generations of professors that don't have that knowledge to pass on to students. Why does phthalo green tint and mix so differently than viridian? Why is naphthol red so different than cadmium red? And I've given lecture demonstrations where people have come up to me and said, I learned more about color in the last hour than I learned in my entire education in art school. Working with artists eyeball to eyeball, listening, taking those insights back, designing, creating, crafting, and bringing that back to the artist studio. That's still at the core of what we do every day. I come from a family of makers. My grandfather built ships for the Royal Navy on the River Clyde in Glasgow. We didn't think of ourselves as creatives. We were just trying to make a living, or in the case of growing up in Maine, just trying to stay warm. And but I worked on old barns, old houses, but I was always looking to make something that really mattered. One of the things I love about our work is that we spend time with people in the best part of their life, the most important part of their life. So if you get something right, people remember. It's an industry where people can take the long view. And I choose to take the long view, do the right thing, and continue to do the right thing. And you can really build something over time that can last. And I met Robert Gamblin and came to know Gamblin, and I was just stunned. I've done my best to keep the brand true to what got us started in the first place. Keep us true to the why. Why are we doing this? And what kind of people are we? It's very meaningful work for me, and for good or bad, I'll be around for a long, long time. We're a company of 29 people doing everything in Portland, all under one roof. If you bought any of our paint in the last 8-10 years, Mike's a third generation oil painter, or Phil, another painter, mixed it. It passed through their hands, one of those two. At the mill, if you bought any of our ink, that was Chris. Chris is a printmaker, a photographer, does a lot of different things, makes all of our ink, and all passes through his hands, and he notices everything. For our paint, Chris covers that at the mill, and also Matt. And then in terms of quality, that's Devin. And Devin looks at everything, every batch. And then we have a team that works in packaging and shipping. We've never had a better team of people. I'm so proud of how through it all, over the years, they all look after each other. And so we've generally keep people quite a long time. And I'm proud of that. And it tells me we must be doing a good job. And the work is just incredibly meaningful. We offer the only palette of colors and set of mediums that are built around the needs of contemporary painters. In terms of color, it's a painter's paint, and Robert wants it to have the perfect texture and consistency for mark making and to support the work of painting. Of course, we're the first company to make a replacement for lead white. We offer a flake white replacement, and in general, we're offering pigments that are true to historic working properties, but safer and more permanent. We have our range of radiant colors. We have our range of grays, Portland warm gray, Portland cool gray, titanium buff. And these are tools that for the working artist allow them to have consistent, reliable mixtures in their work. So you've got a painting that you may not come back to it for a day, you may not come back to it for a week, you may not come back to it for a month, but you need to be able to reliably remix the palette of colors you were working with. All of these pigments are essentially organic materials. So we work very, very hard to ensure that tube to tube, batch to batch, year after year, you can count on us and you can count on our colors to be where you left them the last time. We're not just hitting Pantones, right? We're developing each color to its maximum, and we're using pigment, we're using oil, but we're also using history, science, emotion, and really putting everything we have and everything we know into each batch. I used to tell people that pigments are like elements on the periodic table. And then my daughter did a science project and pointed out to me that they actually are. Zinc is on the periodic table. titanium, cadmium, cobalt. For a lot of colors, we are working with very primary building blocks. It sort of doesn't get any smaller, and it doesn't get any more raw or any more real. And we're trying to get these things to absorb oil to develop every color to its maximum. Cadmium red light is a set of working properties. It's a mass tone, it's a transparency, it's a grind, it's a feeling. And we have to get all of those right and to meet Robert's vision and historical sense for how that color should look, feel, handle, tint, all of it. Everything is adapted to each pigment, mix times, mix speeds, mill time. At its core, it's heat, force, and time. Heat comes from mixing. Heat comes from heating the flax oil before we begin mixing paint. Force comes from the shear of mixing as well as the pressure of the mill rolls. Some colors cooperate wonderfully. Ultramarine blue is one of them. Other colors take quite a bit of work to develop into our expectation for what a color should be. And so I personally love working with these natural, very raw, very authentic materials in developing color for the artists that we work with. Robert Gamblin worked with his teacher, Wolf Kahn, on those, and Wolf had never put two colors down in the same place on his palette, probably in his life. Obviously, an enormous inspiration to Robert. Part of what he was trying to do with the radiant colors was to create a palette of colors for Wolf to support Wolf's work. And essentially, they're a palette of 8 tints at value 6 on the Munsell scale. So why use them? More than Wolf and more than using them in a direct painting technique, they are incredibly useful in color mixing. And I'll give you kind of a couple of examples. If you had a red that you were working with and you wanted to neutralize it a bit, but you want to pull it into kind of toward the neutral core of color space, or pull it even further, a green out of the tube is quite dark in value. So you get this darker mixture on its way to black. Then you need to add white to figure out where you are, what you're working with, and then sort of navigate through color space from there. With the radiance, you're able to pull that red. You could use radiant green, or you could use radiant turquoise and pull that red to the neutral core without making it darker in value. You can pull it to the warm side or the cool side. It's just much faster, much more consistent versus working with unknown amounts of white, maybe a third color in the mixture, a fourth, and trying to replicate that a day, a week, or a month from now in your studio. So how are the radiants made? They're all, with the exception of ultramarine blue, they're all tints created using our titanium zinc white and a modern pigment. So the quinacridones, Hanses for each color. That means they're very, very clean, very, very consistent. And then you have the fabulous working properties of titanium zinc white to support mark making and to ease color mixing. The white that an artist chooses really determines in large part how oil painting is going to feel to them, what mark making is going to feel like, how their colors are going to feel under the knife or brush, and sort of what possibilities they have. On the one hand, you have titanium white, which pounds color down and beats it down like no other. And on the other end of the spectrum, you have zinc white, or our mixing white in our 1980 range, which are much softer, more transparent, and much easier on color in color mixtures. We feel it's really important to get the white right, and we want to help artists to be able to do that. Years ago, probably 80% of the white that was sold was titanium white. Why? Because it's on the list. That's the one on the class list. It is on the more extreme end of the spectrum. And for a lot of painters, it's not the best option. So we've tried to help, as we have in other areas of our work, to connect artists, to help them discover, select, and master the white that really best supports what they're trying to do and what they want from their white. Flake white, in terms of texture, again, a contemporary formulation of lead white, pushes back. Ropey texture, fabulous for working in texture, good opacity, but on the stiff end of the spectrum. My personal favorite in Robert's titanium zinc white. It's whiter than titanium white, more neutral, easier to work with, and just the perfect texture for mark making and mixing without having to use medium. We've also added a titanium buff to the palette. And if you're happy with what you've got, don't change a thing. But if you're wondering a little bit, we have some good resources to help painters find the one that's best for them. Our 1980 colors are our range of what one would call a student grade oil paint. And we really resolved to make those different than they've been made before. What happened was we thought more about, well, why are we doing this? Why are we making these things? And they really went back to 1980, the year Robert started Gamblin. They went back to the one-car garage and the beliefs he had when he started. And the belief was that artists should really be able to paint freely. Artists should be able to use color without hesitation, without reservation, without worrying about how much money is on their palette, and they should have true color. I told Bob, I said, the name's 1980. And of course, for him, it took a minute. It's a number. Really? We're going to name this a number? But we looked back at 1980, and 1980 was actually an amazing year in the world of art. Basquiat and Warhol had a joint show together in New York. It just felt right, and everyone can pronounce it. You don't have to translate it. That's the reason, 1980. In the Renaissance paint making workshop, for the students, they took the master's paint, they added a bit of linseed oil, they added a bit of marble dust, and that was what the students worked with. And that is essentially what we are doing. So we're using the exact same pigments as in our artist grade paints, no dilution, no swapping out of cheaper pigments. We use the exact same linseed oil, same team of people making the paint in our factory in Portland, Oregon, same equipment. So what's different? We're adding a bit of marble dust, which is a colorless extender that maintains the proper texture of the paint. And we're adding a bit of linseed oil. And that enables us to make them at a lower cost and pass on those savings to the artist. But most importantly, as an artist who's learning color mixing, or maybe someone who's painting big, painting thick, experimenting, if you learn to color mix and work with our 1980 oil colors, when you move on to an artist grade paint, whether it's one from us or someone else, you don't have to relearn color mixing. And with a lot of student grade paints, you're working with very diluted color, and quite often you're working more with hues than with true color. So your cadmium red hue, well, that's naphthol red. Naphthol red doesn't act like cadmium red. It's more intense, holds its value in mixtures, doesn't gray down, doesn't behave like cadmium. Whereas with 1980, you're working with the real thing. You're working with true color. You're learning color mixing, and you're learning the working properties of colors. You're getting a clean transparency from your phthalos, your quinacridones, your Hansas, your dioxazine, and you're getting the opacity and the graying down in mixtures that you get from the cadmiums, as you should. And so we've had a really great response from professors that are fed up and have said, look, 1980 only. If you want to buy an artist grade paint, go for it, knock yourself out. But bare minimum, you need to have 1980. You need to have proper color. We never set out to make the cheapest paint first for in the student grade category. We really set out to make the best one, and we've really been pleased with the response. So our conservation colors don't come up a lot. They're not for every artist. They're really made for the work of museum conservators. This came out of Robert Gamblin's work and his relationships and his collaboration with conservators at our National Gallery, at the Getty in Los Angeles, and other museums around the world. He had gained a reputation for figuring out how to make things better and for wanting to make things better, not just as they've been. And what conservators wanted, they needed colors for retouching oils that were true to historic color. They needed a transparency, because you're often wanting to not overpaint the artist's mark and not lose the texture of the mark in a Monet, for example. Very distinct mark making that you need to preserve. And they also wanted no shift in color from wet to dry, no shift in color over time. If that's not all, complete reversibility. So with these, work could be undone, redone, and as approaches to conserving paintings changed, or as paintings change hands from one museum or one conservator to another. So, like anything great we've ever done, it came from really listening and formulating materials for conservators that got them what they wanted, without the compromises of their past materials, difficult to remove, difficult working properties, color performance that was not up to snuff. And Robert, with a lot of listening, a lot of work, a lot of samples, he developed this palette of conservation colors that we continue to make today, that there's very few major museums left that don't use them. People will sometimes ask me, okay, well, who's using it or what are they using it on? And the world of conservation is a secretive one, and where paintings are at times is often also a secret. And so we get glimpses from time to time, or we get phone calls for a bit of help, and it's like, well, what are you working on again? And so one of them, Van Gogh painted his bedroom and was restored fairly extensively using our conservation colors. Robert went and met with the team and consulted on that project. And if you see that one, you can see before and after pictures, and they did an incredible job of preserving the artist's hand and the integrity of the painting, but brought some of the color back. And again, if they change their mind, it's all completely reversible. I've seen the conservation colors used on a Da Vinci, which I still am not getting used to, even though it's been years, but it's a fact. Botticelli's, Van Eyck is the parent of oil painting, and there's works by Van Eyck that have been touched up, not extensively, but bits and pieces here and there, using the conservation colors that Robert developed. And this work with the Smithsonian has been ongoing. Like your National Portrait Gallery, they look after all of the portraits of our presidents and first ladies, and including Kehinde's portrait of Obama, which we obviously contributed a lot of materials to and had to document very carefully for them for their records. Whenever we get a look, it's super interesting, but you just never know what's next and what that next phone call is going to be asking about. Oil painting mediums have created, particularly mediums of the 40s, 50s, 60s, have created all manner of problems for painters, for the environment, and for conservators, for museum conservators looking after paintings. Turpentine, quite awful to be around. I painted a lot of houses to get through university. I call them large monochromatic works. But I was around a lot of turpentine, and you get real irritable real quick. You smell it. And the problem is the things you smell, those are the things that are evaporating the most rapidly. They're the things that are most aggressively trying to get into your lungs and into your nervous system. And they're known carcinogens: toluene, benzene, not things you want to be around. And with Damar, it is not a reversible material. Once you've used a Damar varnish on your painting, that's it, unless you're a conservator. And that would be fine if it weren't for the fact that Damar ages terribly. It darkens very quickly, irreversibly. And Robert was working with Tate London on a series of paintings by Turner, and Turner used a similar medium, which was made by boiling linseed oil, dissolving lead into it, mixing in turpentine. It's been called black oil. It's been called Merige, all manner of things. And when he died, there was a stack of paintings underneath his bed that were discolored terribly. And within his lifetime, he saw the discoloration of his own works. So rather than Damar, we use a soybean oil. Rather than turpentine, we use our Gamsol. And what you get is a medium that is true to historic working properties, safer for you, safer for the environment, and permanent in your painting without that kind of color shift that comes from a Damar medium. Really, when I look back, in the last 200 or so years, no one has done more for oil painting than Robert Gamblin, and his contributions in the area of mediums liberate artists from exposure to turpentine. There's just no need for it. And I love seeing among younger painters, they've never heard of it, they've never seen it, they've never been around it. They've only used Gamsol, and this is all ancient history, which is fine by me. Gamvar varnish is something we get asked about a lot, and it's definitely trending, which is wonderful to see. When I first came to Gamblin, if you asked me about Gamvar, we would say it's a low molecular weight varnish with a refractive index similar to that of linseed oil. To which you might reply, could you repeat that in English? And so the reality with Gamvar is that it is the easiest way to make your painting look better. It was developed by Robert by working with the Getty, Tate, at our National Gallery in the US. And it is essentially a contemporary varnish. Gamvar's water clear, stays water clear. Another really important difference is that it is very thin, much thinner than water. So often painters will varnish their painting and feel like it's too bright, it's too glossy. And what the eye is seeing is that the thickness of the varnish has leveled out the texture of their painting. It's leveled out their brushwork. And so rather than light bouncing off in different directions and being diffuse and natural, it's bouncing off of flat hot spots in the painting when you're trying to shoot it. And which is real frustrating for artists. So with Gamvar, you get a very natural looking varnish. Your painting looks like it did when it was wet, and you don't get that sense that there's something between you and the painting, right? Another really important thing, odorless. No turpentine in it, just Gamsol, essentially odorless, harmless, and as important, reversible. If you put Gamvar on your painting and you want to get back into it for whatever reason or no reason, a little bit of Gamsol and a cloth, and you can just lift it right off and go back into your work. And this is incredibly important for conservators in the 40s, 50s, 60s. Massive collections at the Louvre all over had Damar varnishes slopped on them, and it's going to keep conservators in business for centuries. But now Gamvar is what's used on the most priceless paintings in the collection of pretty much every major museum in the world. And it is in oil painting, and in painting in general, some things come quite hard. Varnishing now is not one of them. And I'm just really happy to see, if you look on Instagram and you search the hashtag Gamvar, you just get loads of people happy with it, and also lots of good information on how to apply it. And one of the things I was asked about is, I thought I had to wait a year. I thought I had to wait 6 months. And with Gamvar, it's not the case. All an artist needs to do is press their thumbnail into the thickest area of their painting. And if that's firm, then they're ready to varnish. And so for many painters, that could be a week, could be less, could be a bit more. But it's thin enough that the paint can continue to oxidize and dry, even if you push it a little bit. So that notion of waiting 6 months or a year, that's just gone. The environment is something that we've thought about way before it was cool to do so. When Robert started Gamblin, Americans were driving around in gigantic cars without regard for much of anything. And Robert had a different view. With oils, if you look at our mediums, you have the option of working with our solvent-free mediums. Those are vegetable oils. That is safflower oil, soybean oil, otherwise known as edamame. These are things you eat. These are things in your food. These are things in your dog's food, in your cat's food. And they're also known materials that artists have been working with for centuries. So if you want a responsible choice of a medium, very simple, very straightforward. We offer gels and fluids that are vegetable oils that can go down the drain, go in the rubbish, or even go on your plate, if you wish. Our Gamsol is meant to be a solution for those who want to use a solvent in their work, but the most responsible one possible. So Gamsol can be reused over and over again as your pigments settle in your brush cleaning jar. You can pour off that Gamsol and continue to reuse it. Eventually, those pigments you can make your own Toric gray in your studio using those pigments with a bit of with a bit of linseed oil, or worst case, throw them away. And as bad as that sounds, humans throw away quite a bit, and that little bit of pigment responsibly thrown away is to me acceptable, and we don't have to feel too bad about it. I mean, most of us make worse health choices on a Saturday night than we do, working in our studio. Another thing people wonder about with oils is, are they off gassing? I smell something. What is it? And not so. Oils dry by taking in oxygen. They dry through oxidation. So you have a faint smell of linseed oil in your studio, safflower oil, depending on the color you're working with. But there is nothing coming off of these materials. Whereas with other materials, you do. There's formaldehydes and other chemicals in acrylic to prevent mold and to accelerate drying, and those are being released, into the air as you're working. So I feel really great about what we've done with oils, and I hear all the time from people that have young children, people that have that are pregnant and that are worried, and we provide a lot of good information and help them make choices, and they generally end up solvent-free painting using our solvent-free mediums, safflower oil to clean up, a soap for a brush cleaner, and it's a perfectly safe studio environment. Our original reclaimed color is our Toric gray, and that is a reclaimed pigment that we're reclaiming from our own equipment. We have a massive system to pull pigment dust away from our paint makers. We capture that, and rather than toss it, we make it into paint. It's different every year, but it's generally a gray, and it puts pigments where they belong, which is on an artist palette rather than in a rubbish bin. John Sabra and his team contacted us about their work, and essentially you have a team of artists and engineers from Ohio University in America that figured out a way to pull iron oxide pigments out of polluted rivers. And this is an area of America that it's had everything done to it. Without much regulation, a ton of stuff ended up into the water, and there's essentially seeps where you have old iron pigment that is rusting and making the water uninhabitable. And they started out with buckets and waders and rubber boots and built their system up, and they capture these iron oxides, pull them out of the water system, and then convert them into pigment. They've seen aquatic life return to streams that were essentially dead. And it's really amazing. It is small scale, but they're getting better at it. And so they contacted us with the notion that we may paint with it. And it's like, of course. And there's some really lovely colors. We offer an iron violet, a brown ochre, a red. Essentially, these are created by heating, as with other pigments, metal pigments. The way you get different shades of cadmium and cobalt is by burning metal at different temperatures. So they've done the same thing, and we're able to offer these colors, a couple of which will probably make it into our palette permanently. We called them limited edition colors because we weren't sure about the supply and being able to get it and how consistent it would be, but it's been consistent. It's been fantastic. And the iron violet in particular is just a really interesting and a very useful color. And when you purchase something, when you purchase that color, we're giving 30% of our sales back to support their efforts, to reinvest in their efforts. And similarly, when you purchase our colors, you're supporting our work in conservation, which is it's a money losing part of our work, but that's not what it's about. And you're supporting that as well, when you choose Gamblin. When you're trying to do the right thing, there's lots of folks who will tell you, what the right thing to do is. Some of our brother and sister companies had become certified benefit corporations or B Corps. We really felt that for us, it was a logical extension of who we are. We also felt like it's kind of what our artists would expect of us. We announced to folks that we were the first American color house to be B Corp certified. They're like, well, yeah, of course, you're Gamblin. And it's given us some direction as to like what really matters. What really should we be working on getting better at, being more thoughtful about. And it's just good to have a guideline, and it's something that can carry on beyond me, beyond my ideas, or beyond the ideas of our management team. And it's something that we are really proud of. And I think our artists are proud of us. This seemed like the right thing to do, and it's felt good. It's felt right. Tools are something we got interested in, and one of the things we learned from our own work, and then from listening to millennials, Gen Y, Gen Z, is that in the olden days, people appreciated a good tool. We started out with our Gamvar brush. We got asked all the time, what do you recommend? What do you recommend? And we looked for things to recommend. We recommended one from Europe. They stopped making it. So we were like, okay, we're in the brush business now. Palette knives, I'm not aware of any major innovation in several hundred years. There's more shapes, different things. We set out to make something more thoughtful, more sustainable, more joyful. One of our goals was, make palette knives that artists can't keep their hands off of. Make painting a little bit more joyful for them, a little bit easier, and maybe keep them painting a little bit longer. Printmaking isn't something that we get asked about a lot, but we all have friends. Robert has friends, and a lot of his friends were printmakers, and they were dissatisfied with their materials. And he really wanted to create workhorse blacks that would do the work of edition printmaking better than any other ink. And we offer a range of block printing or lino printing inks, as well as a line of etching inks, and also actually more recently a lithography ink. We love making the inks, and we love working with printmakers. Again, it's not the money, but they're good people, and they need a proper ink for their work. So we're happy to do it. It's our job. It's our life's work to move and to lead oil painting into the future. And we're the only color house of any significant size on Earth completely dedicated to oil painting. So that will be at the core of our work for as long as I'm around. We're independent. We're family owned. It's my family. So I tell people, we can do anything we want. So we will stay very focused and to face the future while respecting the past. I mean, there's nothing more authentic, natural, and enduring than oils. And I love the fact that artists today have never had more access to color space, more colors to work with. So we're living in the best time there's ever been to be a painter.